welcome to my talk. I'm going to answer a very, very important question. So in GraphQL world, we have mainly two options to develop GraphQL applications. And these are Relay Modern and Apollo. And there has been a new release, a recent new release, and a lot of teams are asking which one to choose, which one is the best. So I'm going to try to answer this question. But before we start digging into the differences, I want to introduce myself. I'm Gerard. I'm a Google developer expert, and this is a badge that Google gives to people that are contributing to the community, and they are giving talks, they are writing blog posts. So this is how I got mine. As you can see, it's also time to have fun. I'm also doing, besides the talks and blog posts and other things, I'm also doing Master of Ceremonies. So maybe if you have come to any of the conferences where I was doing Master of Ceremonies, you have seen me playing with the audience, playing games, taking people on the stage. I mean, that's quite fun. Otherwise, maybe you have found some of my blogs. Usually, I will cover the topics that I do at conferences. I will cover in blog posts. So it can also work the other way around. So if you see me talking about a topic in a conference, you will probably find the blog post covering with more detail. I'm also an international speaker, so this is bragging time, so I'm just putting a lot of, it's all fake. I've never been in these places. No, they are for real. The only ones that I haven't been yet, which is the ones in green, these are places I will be in the next couple of months. Okay, so I'm also a trainer, and you will see me doing trainings from time to time. So maybe you can recognize some of the guys here, maybe not. I'm also a community leader, so as you probably attend some of the local meetups, I also run a meetup in London. And this one is GraphQL London, and it's quite successful. I think you also have GraphQL Tel Aviv. Any of the people here is from GraphQL Tel Aviv? From the audience? Only one? Okay, welcome. Welcome to the talk. But it's really growing fast. So I think I created this community late last year, and it's already over 1,000 members. So it's quite impressive. I also was attending to these React Infill Pops, and this was in Canary Islands with Max Stoiber and Nick Raff. I also give a talk around GraphQL. This was last May. And this is really cool. You can do like 3 days of training and then 3 days of building an application with other people. But you also can do like surfing lessons and things like this. I mean, it's really, really cool. And that's the picture we took at the end. Okay, so let's go into the topic. So before I go into describing the different features from these two options, Relay Modern and Apollo Client, I'm going to go back a little bit in time. So for the people that are new to GraphQL, this is kind of getting everyone in the same page. So this is a GraphQL timeline. So it all started in 2012 when Facebook was migrating from HTML5 to native applications. So you can see the first what was the version released at the time. So since 2012, we have been all using GraphQL. I mean, if you have a Facebook client, you have been using GraphQL behind the scenes, which is quite cool. It's only like recently that GraphQL is open source, and this is 2015. And since then, there has been few developments. So the first version, the first client that appeared was a Relay Classic. Well, it's called today Relay Classic. And a lot of people jump into that wagon. It's only in 2016 that we can see more adoption. And probably this is the biggest one, and probably you remember. And this is when GitHub migrates all of the REST APIs to GraphQL. Then we get the first website, which is graphql.org. And we celebrate with the first GraphQL-only conference, which is GraphQL Summit. That was last year during October. And just this year, we also had some interesting news. So we get the first Apollo client release, which is now more stable and covers a lot of the use cases that we are interested, like subscriptions and other interesting bits. And then just recently, we got also the Relay Modern version 1. So this is a little bit of covering all the timeline for GraphQL. There's also some announcements that I think around tooling that are interesting to mention at this point. One of them is Launchpad. So we can use this tool to create our own GraphQL servers, and we can share the URL, the endpoint, and other people can start building clients using this tool. And you maybe have seen some demos with React Native, and you can use Launchpad to just provide the information to run those. So that's quite cool. There's also a new website which is called GraphQL Explorer. And then here you will find tutorials for any of the stacks available, and this is kind of the go-to website. Just in a few weeks, we will also be doing the second edition of GraphQL Summit in San Francisco, and I guess that this is a really good opportunity to catch up with all the new developments. Obviously, there's also GraphQL Europe, and maybe you have to wait a little bit more, but that's also interesting. And I think that's all to cover a little bit of the background. So let's start with the Relay Modern client. And this is just been released in the last couple of weeks. So there's still not much people that is using it, and there's a lot of questions that, is it better than Relay Classic, etc. So let me cover a little bit of it. As an overview, this is a library maintained by Facebook, as you probably know. The latest release was 1.3, so there has been some changes recently, just 12 days ago. And the integrations are only for React, but now in this new version, they abstracted some of the layers, so you can also use other frameworks. We haven't seen any of these frameworks yet, but now it's kind of possible. So it will be interesting to see which clients are built with these new abstractions. In GitHub, it's quite popular. We have almost 10,000 stars. So this is a very serious project that we can rely on. Some of the main features. Relay Modern is focused on performance, and there are a few things that the Facebook team has put in place. One of them is, the most popular is the compiler. So we have a Relay compiler that will go through all of our queries and mutations and fragments, and will build some structures that then will automatically import in your project. And we have to do some work to make this work, but then we get some of the benefits like small optimizations and some static analysis of the queries, which is something that you don't have to do later on. Another thing that we can see from Relay Modern is that we find some of the Facebook abstractions that we are relying on. And probably if you were using Relay Classic, you will find those familiar. One of the terms that you can see when using Relay is collocation. And this is a declarative way to add, annex the data dependencies into your components. So it feels really natural, and it just is able to create really complex models without having to think too much. One of the other differences that we can see in Relay Modern is that it uses a custom store. And comparing to Apollo, this can be, this can be a good thing or a bad thing. This also can be an open door to use some other store implementations like a MobX and other solutions. So it's really interesting. This, though, introduces some more abstractions, and we can see connections, records, fields, and maybe this feels a little bit overwhelming at first, but then it makes a lot of sense. So it's not too much overhead. Another thing that we can find is the concept of viewer, which is the user, and then for pagination, we are just using some kind of reference implementation from Facebook. So once you learn all of these concepts, you can really work in complex clients. And Relay Modern will support you. So you don't have to implement everything from scratch. So I've covered a little bit of Relay Modern. I'm going to cover now Apollo Client. And Apollo Client released the final version first, so maybe you are more experienced with using the Apollo Client at this point. Or if you were coming from Relay Classic, you will be wondering, is this a good moment to migrate? Maybe you want to migrate to Relay Modern, which may make sense for you, or maybe you want to look into Apollo Client. So let's look into what Apollo Client offers. As an overview, we will just cover the same thing, the same points that we did before. So Apollo Client is maintained by Meteor and the Apollo team. And the latest release is 1.9.2, and it was just released 8 days ago. So you can see that both projects are really hot on GitHub with plenty of updates. Then this is probably one of the main differences between the two, and that's the integrations. We have React, but also we use Angular or Vue. And this can be, a difference today, but probably we'll see implementations of these integrations on Relay Modern, so it's probably not so much of a difference. On GitHub, it also has support, probably not as much as the 10,000 stars, but it's growing steadily. Some main features for Apollo Client. So you can see there's a lot of community contributions from the Apollo team, and that's quite interesting. Also, if we have seen from the timeline that we have seen a lot of changes into the Apollo Client when we have just seen a major release from Relay Modern, so it was a little bit behind. Now they have catch up. So now maybe it's not a good moment to compare this, but that's a good point from Apollo Client. Another feature that usually is mentioned from Apollo Client is this simplicity. So usually when you build with Apollo Client, it will be easy. It will be using concepts that you are familiar with, and this is also a good quality. One of those comes from using Redux Store. And most of you are very familiar with it, so it will just feel natural to use it as well when you are developing using Apollo Client. The integration we mentioned with other frameworks. And I also want to point some of the version Apollo 2 that it's coming in a few weeks. And I just asked the Apollo team to get some sneak preview, and they told me this. So just believe me on those. I have no clue. But they are now building a new version of Apollo Client, which is more modular and smaller. They also built this new network interface, which will be based on observables. And there are some interesting use cases. They are also now supporting the live and defer directives that we have heard in different conferences. Now they are supported in Apollo Client too. There's also the ability now to use custom stores. So we were using mainly Redux, but now we open also to other implementations. It's the promise that it will be faster as well. And we have some new implementations for the cache for large data sets. So these are a few interesting features coming. The migration will be easy, so if you are in Apollo Client 1 today, it will be really easy for you to migrate. So these are some tidbits from Apollo Client 2. To make the comparison between these two, my plan was to kind of build the same application and then see what the different areas compare to each other. So we are going to build an Instagram clone, and it's going to be using this bit. So I'm going to use React, both with Relay Modern and Apollo Client on the client side. And on the server, I'm going to use GraphQL, which gives me all the features that I need from a data source. It just makes things more easy for me. There's also the option to build the full GraphQL server if you want, but for this example, it will be just fine. The schema will be very easy. We are just going to be able to create some posts. The post will be based on a description and also a URL pointing to an image. And we will use some of the GraphQL tools to create this schema on the server side and then be able to extend that schema by using some command line interface tool. So let me just do a little demo so you know what we are talking about. And I thought about the use case, and I wanted to buy a jumper. So I'm going to use this jumper. Okay, I already have it. So I'm going to buy for Jumper Cats, Universe, and Pizza, because it makes a really awesome jumpers. And I'm going to pick one of those. What about this one? I don't know if this is, I don't know how far you take fashion here. I'm going to take it very far. And, okay, let me just, I have two clients. I have the Relay Modern client and also an Apollo client, both with subscriptions, with real time. So I'm just going to make sure this is live. Okay, don't do this at home. Okay, so it worked on the Relay Modern client. We have a new entry, and we have just the description and the URL with some other options. Let's see if the other client, yay, it worked. Well, this is a very basic demo. So no panic here. So okay, let's. So we have seen more or less the features. We get similar features from the both clients. We can update anything on the server, and they will just get the latest bits. So let's see the different stages. So we'll go for the setup first, and I will just go comparing the two, and you can just follow along. Well, for the setup, we need to do, as I mentioned, we need to set up the compiler, which is the Relay compiler, and also link it with the Babel plugin. And this will run these optimizations on all of our fragments and queries and whatnot. And we'll just make sure that we use a very efficient GraphQL. This will be using an environment, which is the term in Relay Modern. This is based in a network, object, and a store. And then we will just use an attribute for our components that will pass this environment context. For Apollo Client, we use a different approach just to achieve similar goals. What we have is a Webpack loader, which is part of the GraphQL tag project, and we can use that to compile our queries. Then on the setup, we use this Apollo Client object with a network interface and an Apollo provider high-order component to run our queries. As you can see, we don't have any store because the store is just using the Redux store that we all know. So I'm going to rate 3 stars for Relay. I'm going to do this for the different areas. And also 3 stars for Apollo Client. I mean, this was a very similar setup. There's nothing really different from these 2 options. So they all rate 3 stars. Let's look into the queries now. So just to see an overview with this diagram, we are now looking into fetching data from the GraphQL server. So we are looking at the top part, and we are just running a query from our client. So this is what we're going to cover now. For the queries on Relay Modern, we use this query renderer, and this is a component, a high-order component that will take the environment that we just did the setup and our query. And this query will usually be at the root, and we'll just maybe take the list of posts for our application. You can also have multiple roots if you need. For the queries, we are going to see that Relay Modern is going to generate the queries for us. And this is an interesting concept that we introduced before, which is the collocation. And Relay Modern, what we'll do is wrap up our components with a concept that is called a container. And it's basically composed by fragments, the fragments that we know from GraphQL. Then Relay Modern is going to grab all this information and create the best performing queries for us. So it's kind of automated. We don't need to worry about this. It's Relay Modern doing it for us. So it's a little bit opinionated. We will see that we have other options with Apollo Client. In Apollo Client, we are using the GraphQL high-order component, which is also a wrapper around our components. So it's a little bit different. The way we do our queries is manually. We need to think about the queries we want to build, and we are not just using the fragments, which is the data for our components, but we are also in charge of building the queries. We can build any complexity of queries. So that can also introduce some suboptimal queries. It depends how you manage it. This is also more flexible, but then we may lose some of these optimizations that Relay Modern is doing for us. So I'm going to rate 2, because it adds some more complexity, and it kind of removes some of the flexibility. But also I'm going to rate 2 stars on the Apollo Client, because we use some of the optimizations and performance benefits. So there's not really a winner here, because there are some good things and bad things in both sides. Let's move into mutations. So now we are going to change our model, and we are using the mutations API from our GraphQL server, which is this bit at the bottom. So let's compare these two. For Relay Modern, we are using now commit mutation API, and we are passing as well the environment, which is a common practice. And then we are going to do something quite particular, which is we are going to interface with the store using these different APIs. One of them is the connection. So we have to define what is the connection point for any manipulation that we want to do. And then we have different APIs to access the different records and fields, which are the types and fields in a GraphQL schema. So it introduces some abstractions, but are not really difficult to follow. It also provides all of the common features. We have error handling, we have optimistic updates. So we have all the full package. There's not much of a difference in this side. On Apollo Client, we can see that all of these mutations are passed down by using properties. And we are going to use the same GraphQL that we were using for the queries. This is the same approach. We don't have an import like in Relay Modern. We are using the same approach that we use for queries. So that's a little bit nicer. And then we have this mutate API to run the mutations. This now, because we're using Redux, what we have is a reducer, and then we can grab any of the information from the arguments, so that makes a little bit easier. We don't need to use an abstraction like we use in Relay Modern. We also have all of the common features besides this, so that's not much of a difference. And I've rated a little bit more on the Apollo client side because it's a little bit easier. As long as you are familiar with Redux and the access to the store is really standard, then you just need to access via the arguments the different options. So it's really easy, and you don't have to learn all the other abstractions of Relay Modern. So that's a little bit behind on the rating. I also tried subscriptions, so that was also easy for me to add to both of my solutions. And subscriptions are working in this specific way. So the way we implement subscriptions in GraphQL is by creating these commands that will work on the GraphQL server, and they will be listening for our mutations and will create these events. So let's imagine we add a new post. What we can do is subscribe to this specific mutation, and then this will create an event that will be stored on the backend. Then the next step, the next phase, is broadcasting these events. So if we have a couple of clients or thousands of clients, we need now to tell them, okay, there was a new post, for example. And we will do this using these single events, and this will be broadcasted to every single of the clients. So every operation then is multiplied by the number of clients. Let's see how these two implementations differ. So on Relay Modern, we have this request subscription, and as always, we pass the environment. And this will use this same approach that we use with mutations. So we have this connection and different APIs for records and fields. For Apollo Client, we are using subscribe to more. And using also the same approach that we use for Redux. So it's a little bit simpler. So I'm going to also rate Relay Modern a little bit less. But also I'm going to rate Apollo Client a little bit less because setting up subscriptions is a little bit cryptic still for both options. So you get into a lot of trouble just to make the fiddling. So I wasn't happy with any of the two, but I mean, it's fair enough. So for the final round, if you got so far, you really want to see which one of the two is best. So let's see that. Relay Modern, awesome option, really good. If you are familiar with Facebook Ways, so if you already use Relay Classic, this is probably the best option for you. You will see like all the concepts that you are familiar, and you will build like maybe even faster. There's an extra benefit that is when you have a model with a lot of fragments, this is kind of the best scenario for Relay Modern because it can run a lot of optimizations on that. So if you have a model with hundreds of similar types with fragments that are the same, Relay Modern will just make this, really compact and efficient. For Apollo Client is also an awesome option, so maybe you can get the final, the end of the movie here. But okay, if you may need some other clients, or maybe your team not only knows React but other frameworks, this may be a good option for you. If your team is familiar with Redux, which is kind of the standard way, this will be really easy to learn. And then, as a final comparison, this is like less overhead on the learning phase. So it's a little bit easier to go around. So I'm going to give 3 to both of them. I mean, it just depends on the different scenarios, and I hope I have covered a lot of them for you. If you want more information, I have both projects, the one for Relay Modern and the one for Apollo Client. You will find these including queries, mutations, and subscriptions, so they are quite grounded. There's also the Medium blog post that will cover some other bits like authorization, but this is only for Apollo client. And that's all. Thank you for listening.